My son is dead. You no longer have any reason to remain in this family's home." Eleanor Whitmore looked at Grace and Lily as though they were strangers asking for shelter from the rain. Their clothes had been stuffed into garbage bags and dumped outside the gate. But when Eleanor ordered the doors locked, she had no idea she was throwing out the one person legally appointed to manage Whitmore House. 3 days earlier, Grace Miller had been standing beside her husband's coffin, holding Lily together as they said goodbye to Andrew. Now she had returned to the place where they had lived for 8 years and found their books, school uniforms, and personal belongings lying in the mud beneath the rain. Victoria came down the steps and pulled the house key from Grace's hand. "Andrew left you nothing. This property belongs to the Whitmore family. It is not a reward for spending 8 years pretending to be a devoted wife." She handed the key to a security officer and pointed toward the gate. The metal barrier began sliding shut. Lily suddenly ran toward the front door. "My picture with Dad Andrew is still on the table. I only want the picture." The security officer stretched out an arm and blocked her in front of several neighbors watching from beneath their porches. Lily stopped. Her cheeks turned red with humiliation. Grace immediately pulled her daughter close. "Do not touch her," she said, her voice low but firm. Grace did not beg to stay. She looked at Eleanor and asked only for their identification documents, medical records, Lily's school supplies, and the wooden box Charles had given Grace before he died. Victoria crossed her arms. "Everything inside this house belongs to the Whitmore family, even the things you think you paid for." Grace remembered the wooden box carved with the image of a ship. It had once been kept in Charles's room. He had told her to protect it if the family ever fought over the house. But on the night of Andrew's funeral, the box had disappeared. Grace did not rush through the gate. She took off her coat and held it over Lily's head, then bent down to pick up a torn garbage bag. The corner of Grace's nursing certificate was sticking out from beneath the wet clothes. Lily held onto her school bag and tried not to cry. As Grace prepared to leave, a sedan stopped outside the gate. Daniel Harper stepped out carrying a legal briefcase. He was the estate attorney who had worked for Charles for years. Daniel looked at the bags lying in the rain, then turned towards security. "Open the gate," Victoria stepped forward. "You have no authority to give orders here." Daniel did not argue. He removed a certified document bearing the Charleston County seal. "Then who authorized you to remove the legal trustee of Whitmore House from trust property?" Eleanor frowned. "My son was the trustee." "No, Mrs. Whitmore. 2 years before his death, Charles transferred the house into the Whitmore Preservation Trust. The notarized and recorded documents named Grace Miller as the primary beneficiary and the sole successor trustee." For a moment, the sound of rain striking the gatehouse roof seemed unusually loud. Victoria looked at the document, then at Grace, as though Grace had secretly planned a trap. Grace was stunned too. Charles had once told her that the person who protected a house did not always carry its name. He had asked her to take responsibility for a community care plan. But Grace had never known that plan was part of the trust. Her first question was not whether she could sell the house. It was not whether Eleanor had to leave. "Can Lily go inside and get her photograph and our documents?" Daniel looked at the security officer. "She has the right to retrieve her personal property. From this moment forward, nobody moves records or belongings, changes locks, or signs any sale agreement until the trust authority is formally established." Victoria gave a dry laugh. "You are too late." She pulled a mortgage agreement from her leather bag. The amount on the first page was $750,000. At the bottom of the document was a signature bearing the name Andrew Whitmore. "My brother used the house as collateral. The loan is already past due. Whether this trust exists or not, the bank is still going to take the house." A woman in a cream-colored coat stepped out of a car parked across the street. Rebecca Lane, director of Lane Heritage Properties, handed Daniel her business card with a polished smile. "I am the transaction advisor. We already have a buyer prepared to satisfy the loan if the family agrees to a quick sale. A private hotel would preserve the historic character of the estate." Daniel flipped through the title report attached to the mortgage. His eyes stopped at the issue date. "This report does not mention the Whitmore Preservation Trust," Rebecca answered immediately. "We relied on records provided by the family representative. The trust was recorded before this loan existed. An updated title report should have shown it. Rebecca's smile remained in place, but her grip tightened around the documents. Daniel turned to Victoria. "Stop the transaction. Return the wooden box and every record that has been moved. An independent party needs to review the trust, the loan, and Charles's legal capacity. This is your opportunity to preserve evidence before this becomes a formal case." Victoria did not hesitate. "I am not handing control of my family's home to a nurse who manipulated a sick man. Grace was beside my father when he was at his weakest. She knew exactly what to say to make him sign." Grace looked directly at her. "I cared for Charles after his stroke. I never asked him to give me this house." Eleanor stepped beside Victoria. The grief of losing her husband and then her son had hardened into something colder than anger. Charles could be strict, but he would never willingly hand Whitmore House to an outsider. "I will not let you take my family's names." Lily looked down at her wet shoes. For 8 years, Victoria had reminded her that she was not a Whitmore. Grace suddenly understood what her silence had been teaching her daughter. It was teaching Lily that being diminished was the price of being allowed to belong to a family. Victoria filed a petition asking the court to suspend Grace's authority as trustee, arguing that Charles had not been mentally competent when the trust was created. Daniel filed an emergency request to freeze all transactions and preserve the property. Until the court reviewed the matter, neither side could change the existing situation. Grace still could not return to the estate. That night, she and Lily stayed in a motel near the highway, their wet clothes hanging over chairs. Lily placed the photograph she had recovered beside the bed. In the picture, Andrew was carrying her on his back in the Whitmore garden. "I am sorry, Mom," Lily said. "Maybe because I am not really a Whitmore, they never accepted you either." Grace sat down in front of her daughter. "No child should ever apologize for wanting a home, and you are not the reason adults choose to be cruel." After Lily fell asleep, Daniel reviewed the terms of the trust. Grace had the right to live in and manage the property, but she could not sell the house for her personal benefit. Eleanor's right to remain in the home was protected, and part of Whitmore House was legally required to serve a senior care program. "Charles did not give me wealth," Grace said. "He gave you responsibility," Daniel replied. "And somebody is trying to sell the property before you have the chance to carry out that responsibility." The next morning, the court issued a temporary order. No sale, no additional mortgage, no movement of records, no lock changes, and no changes to anyone's residential rights until the hearing. Grace's authority had not yet been permanently confirmed, but Victoria could not sell the house either. Victoria immediately sent accusations to the press and to Grace's employer, claiming that the nurse had exploited a stroke patient. Photographs of Grace helping Charles take medication and practice walking were published beside suggestions that she had stayed close to him because of his property. By noon, the director of the care facility where Grace worked called her. "We are not concluding that you did anything wrong, but because the allegations directly involve professional ethics, you will be placed on temporary leave while the board reviews the matter." Grace ended the call and looked at her nursing uniform still folded inside one of the garbage bags. In less than 4 days, she had lost her husband, lost her home, lost the right to enter the house she had helped protect, and now lost the job she used to support Lily. Daniel did not comfort her with promises. Instead, he placed the mortgage agreement on the table and pointed to the signature at the bottom. Andrew always signed his full middle name. This agreement only says Andrew Whitmore, and the signing date was the 17th of last month. Grace remembered that day clearly. Andrew had flown to Atlanta for an investment conference connected to his company. Daniel checked his travel schedule, hotel confirmation, and phone records. Then he opened the archived email system from his office. Andrew had called Daniel twice during the final week of his life. There was also an email sent on the exact date the mortgage signature appeared. Daniel turned the screen toward Grace. Against the white background was a single sentence. "I never gave Victoria permission to borrow money against Whitmore House." Andrew's email left the motel room completely silent. Grace read the sentence denying the loan again and again, caught between hope and pain. If her husband had known that someone was using his signature, why had he never told her? Daniel did not try to speak for a dead man. He simply preserved the email according to legal procedure and divided the investigation into 3 separate areas: Charles's mental capacity, the validity of the trust, and the origin of the $750,000 mortgage. Charles's medical records showed that after his stroke, he had limited mobility but no dementia. His physician had documented that Charles recognized family members, understood the value of his property, and remained capable of making decisions. During an interview with Daniel, the doctor confirmed that Charles had accurately described Whitmore House, the beneficiaries, and his plan to create a senior care program there. A notarization video also existed, but the original was being held by a legal records service. Daniel needed a court order to obtain the complete version. He refused to rely on an incomplete copy without metadata and give Victoria an opportunity to claim the evidence had been altered. Grace provided her own financial statements. Over 8 years, nearly all of the inheritance she had received from her mother had gone toward property taxes, roof repairs, electrical upgrades, and preventing old debt from putting Whitmore House at risk. Eleanor could not deny those payments. Grace chose to contribute while she was Andrew's wife, Eleanor said in a sworn statement. That does not give her the right to take control of family property. Grace did not ask anyone to thank her. She only asked Daniel to compare every payment with the moments when the house had been in danger of tax penalties, losing insurance coverage, or facing action from lenders. The numbers showed that she had not been buying favor. She had been keeping the house alive while the people carrying the Whitmore name avoided looking at the bills. But outside Daniel's office, accusations traveled faster than evidence. At school, another student called Lily the daughter of a gold digger. She returned to the motel with ink on her shirt because she had squeezed a pen so hard that it broke. I could tell them Grandma Victoria threw our things into the rain, Lily said. I could tell them she always said I was not a real Whitmore. Grace wiped the ink from her daughter's hand. You have the right to tell the truth when someone asks, but do not let their cruelty teach you how to be cruel. Grace still had not been allowed to return to her regular job. However, her nursing license had not been suspended, so 3 times a week she volunteered at a community clinic serving elderly patients. She changed bandages, checked blood pressure, and listened to people who could not afford treatment. Grace's kindness did not disappear simply because someone else had given it an ugly name. After one of those shifts, Samuel Ortiz waited for her in the parking lot. The house manager had served the Whitmore family for more than 30 years. He kept looking around before handing Grace a small, folded note. Mr. Charles recorded every important decision in a journal he kept inside the wooden box, Samuel said. He also kept a brass key in there. What did the key open? The control cabinet for the old medical call system. After his stroke, the system recorded conversations in his room so his care could be monitored. Grace immediately called Daniel. He requested a court-supervised inventory of Charles's room with a neutral representative present. 2 days later, the door was opened in front of Daniel, Victoria, Samuel, and a court officer. Almost everything looked untouched. The wooden bed, the medication table, the armchair beside the window. But on the bookshelf, a clean rectangle stood out against the surrounding dust. The wooden box had been removed recently. I have never seen any box, Victoria said. Lily, standing beside Grace, suddenly looked up as though she wanted to speak. Then she looked at Andrew's photograph on the wall, at Eleanor still wearing mourning clothes, and stayed silent. Grace realized her daughter knew something, but she would not force Lily to speak in front of people already prepared to turn a child into a target. Daniel documented the dust mark and issued a formal evidence preservation notice. He gave Victoria a second opportunity to return the box before anyone accused her of intentionally destroying or concealing evidence. Victoria did not respond. That same night, she instructed Rebecca to remove several items from the estate under the claim that they were preparing for an appraisal. Samuel saw a truck bearing the Lane Heritage Properties logo leave through the rear gate after 9 o'clock. Standing behind a row of trees, he photographed the license plate, recorded the time, and captured images of wooden crates covered with blankets. Daniel sent the photographs to Michael Grant, a financial investigator hired by the trust to trace the property and the loan. Michael started with the things people had the least ability to lie about: money trails and mailing addresses. He discovered that every notice connected to the loan had been sent to the office of Victoria's event company, not to Whitmore House. The loan had been delinquent for months, but Grace and Daniel had never received a warning letter or foreclosure notice. At Charleston Heritage Bank, a legal representative confirmed that the process against the property had already begun based on the agreement carrying Andrew's signature and the title report supplied by Rebecca. Rebecca remained composed. When the documents were prepared, Andrew was still considered the family heir. Control of the trust is under dispute, so the bank cannot be expected to wait indefinitely. Daniel answered, "The property belonged to the trust before the loan was created. A person who does not own the house cannot mortgage it simply because people once expected him to inherit it." Daniel requested an order stopping the auction, but the court wanted more direct evidence of forgery. A handwriting expert found signs that Andrew's signature had been imitated. The slant was unnatural. The pen movement stopped in places where Andrew normally wrote continuously, and his middle name was missing. Still, the digital copy alone was not enough for a final conclusion without the original contract. Victoria used the delay to her advantage. She held a small press conference outside Whitmore House, standing beside Eleanor and accusing Grace of trying to steal the home of a 65-year-old widow. "My mother just lost her husband and her son," Victoria told the cameras. "Now an outsider is trying to take the last place she has called home her entire life." Grace did not appear to argue with her. She sent a short statement through Daniel. "I am not asking Eleanor Whitmore to leave the house. Nobody will be removed while these rights are being clarified. My goal is to protect the trust property and the wishes of Charles Whitmore." Rebecca watched the report from her office, then switched off the screen. The story of the greedy daughter-in-law was beginning to lose its power once Grace publicly protected the right of the same woman who had thrown her out. Rebecca immediately urged the bank to keep the process moving and assured them that a buyer was ready to close quickly. Meanwhile, Michael followed the $750,000. Most of the money had gone into Victoria's failing event company. Another portion had been used as a deposit on a failed project, to cover personal expenses and to pay creditors. Lane Heritage Properties received an unusually large transaction consulting fee immediately after the loan was funded. Not $1 went toward repairing the roof, paying taxes, or maintaining Whitmore House, Michael told Grace and Daniel. "But I still need to complete the account trail before I can prove Rebecca knew where the money came from and knew there was a problem with the title report." Before they could receive his final report, a courier envelope arrived at Daniel's office. Inside was an official notice from Charleston Heritage Bank. The loan was past due. The current dispute was not enough to delay enforcement forever. Whitmore House would be placed at auction in 10 days unless the court issued a new order. Grace stared at the date printed in bold. It was also the date of Lily's upcoming 13th birthday. That evening at the motel, Lily was drawing Whitmore Garden from memory. Grace placed the auction notice face down on the table, but Lily had already seen the words 10 days. "If they sell the house, what happens to my picture and Grandpa Charles's things?" Grace did not promise something she could not guarantee. "I will do everything the law allows to stop it." Outside the window, highway lights swept across the motel room and disappeared. Grace understood that they were no longer racing only to save a mansion. If Whitmore House passed to a buyer before the main hearing, the remaining records and the old medical call system could disappear along with control of the property. On the table, Samuel's photograph of Rebecca's truck lay beside the auction notice. Somewhere among the crates that had been removed from the estate was the wooden box Charles had left behind. Grace had 10 days to find it before the house, and every secret still hidden inside it was sold to a stranger. 10-day countdown began. Michael worked through the night and confirmed that the $750,000 had been divided among Victoria's business debts, a deposit on a failed project, personal expenses, and an unusually large fee paid to Rebecca. Not $1 had been used for Whitmore House. Rebecca remained calm when questioned. "My fee was included in the contract. I only worked with the records my client provided." Michael placed 2 title search requests on the table. The first was an updated report that clearly listed the Whitmore Preservation Trust. Less than an hour later, Rebecca's office requested a second report using an older cutoff date, one that excluded the trust information. "Your company could see the updated record," Michael said, "but someone deliberately requested an older version." Rebecca did not answer. She ended the meeting and called Victoria immediately. That evening at the motel, Lily sat beside Andrew's photograph for a long time before approaching her mother. "I know where the box went," she said. "On the night of the funeral, I saw Grandma Victoria carry it out of Grandpa Charles's room. She put it on the cot belonging to the woman in the cream-colored coat." Grace knelt until she was level with her daughter. "Why did you not tell me before? Dad Andrew had just died. Grandma Eleanor was crying. I was afraid everyone would say I was tearing the family apart again." Grace wrapped her arms around Lily. "The truth does not tear a family apart. People who force a child to stay silent in order to protect a lie do that." Grace did not bring Lily into a confrontation. Daniel arranged for her to be interviewed by a child protection specialist using neutral questions. Afterward, they reviewed the inventory photographs submitted by Lane Heritage Properties. In one photograph of an antique cabinet, the corner of the wooden box carved with a ship could be seen on a cart in the background. Daniel requested a preservation and search order for the storage facility connected to the transaction. 3 days before the auction, a court-appointed representative opened the Lane Heritage Properties storage unit. The box was found beneath a cloth in an area containing personal items that had never been listed in the inventory. Grace did not touch it until it had been photographed and opened in front of witnesses. Inside were Charles's journal, receipts showing Grace's payments for property taxes and repairs, a letter addressed to Eleanor, a copy of the trust certificate, and the brass key. In his journal, Charles had written clearly that Grace had used the inheritance from her mother to save the house. He also knew that Andrew had repeatedly taken money to help Victoria and had warned his son that compassion could not replace responsibility. One sentence had been underlined twice. "If they use my words against Grace, the house will still remember the entire story." Samuel recognized the brass key. It opened the control cabinet for the old medical call system. Under court supervision, they entered the technical room. The key fit perfectly. But the storage compartment inside was empty. The data drive had been removed from its rack. Victoria claimed the old system had stopped working long ago. Daniel documented the missing equipment, but did not accuse anyone until they knew who had removed it. The wooden box had pointed them in the right direction, but it still was not enough to explain the disputed recording or stop the auction. That same day, a phone specialist recovered an unsent message Andrew had written to Grace. "I have let them take advantage of you for too long. I will tell you everything after tonight's meeting." Emails and search history showed that Andrew had been preparing to report the forged signature and had arranged to meet Victoria on the night of the accident. But Michael also discovered that Andrew had secretly taken money from the couple's joint account several times to pay his sister's debts. Grace sat in Daniel's office staring at her husband's name on the transfer orders. Andrew had loved her. He had wanted to confess. But before that final day, he had still allowed Grace to use her inheritance to save Whitmore House while secretly sending money to Victoria. He was going to make it right, Daniel said, without trying to excuse him. But wanting to make it right on the last day does not erase the years he let me carry the burden for him, Grace replied. For the first time, she allowed herself to remember Andrew as a human being capable of both love and cowardice, not as a perfect husband made innocent by death. Vehicle records revealed another disturbing detail. A brake warning had been active for weeks before Andrew's accident. A repair shop had sent an estimate to Victoria because she had been using the vehicle before Andrew. The shop owner confirmed that Victoria had delayed the repair because of the cost and had asked for the dashboard warning to be cleared. Investigators found no evidence that Victoria had wanted Andrew to die, but concealing the safety warning may have contributed to the accident, and it showed that she had placed money above a known risk to her own brother. When Daniel showed the repair records to Eleanor, she read the estimate again and again. "Victoria told me the car had been inspected," she whispered. "You can continue protecting your daughter," Daniel said, "but you cannot say you have not seen the evidence." Eleanor did not side with Grace. But for the first time, she also did not call Victoria to warn her about what Daniel had discovered. Once Victoria learned that the wooden box had been found, she struck back before its contents could be publicly verified. She held a press conference and released a recording of Grace speaking to Charles. "You have to sign before they take the house away." The clip lasted only a few seconds. There was nothing before it, nothing after it. Combined with images of Charles in a wheelchair and Grace wearing her nursing uniform, the recording made it appear that she had pressured a vulnerable patient into signing the trust documents. The care facility extended Grace's suspension. The court also refused to permanently confirm her authority as trustee until the authenticity and context of the recording could be resolved. Only 4 days remained before the auction. Rebecca offered a settlement. Grace would receive reimbursement, help restoring her job, and additional compensation. In return, she would surrender the trust, remain silent about the forged signature, and agree to the sale of Whitmore House. "You can take your daughter away from this scandal with enough money to start a new life," Rebecca said. "One house is not worth destroying Lily's future." If Grace signed, she could return to work and escape the public attacks. But Charles's senior care program would disappear. Victoria and Rebecca could turn a fraudulent transaction into a completed sale. "You used a child to throw me out," Grace said. "Now you are using her future to buy my silence. I refuse." It was Victoria and Rebecca's final chance to stop. They kept the auction date. Michael began analyzing the recording. The waveform showed several small cuts. The background sound changed from rain to air conditioning noise, then back to wind. The phrases had not been spoken during the same conversation. "We can prove the recording was edited," Michael said. "But to defeat the meaning they have attached to it, we need the original." Samuel studied the diagram of the old medical call system. Then he remembered something. Every medical alert from Charles's room had once been sent to an outside monitoring service. If the recordings had been created for care purposes, copies might have been backed up on the provider's servers rather than stored only on the missing drive. Daniel immediately requested a court order requiring the storage company to produce an intact copy. With only 2 days remaining before the auction, the files arrived under electronic seal. The complete recording changed everything. Grace had never pressured Charles to sign the trust. In fact, she had told him to wait until his doctor evaluated him and an independent attorney confirmed his legal capacity before making any decision. The sentence, "You have to sign before they take the house away," came from a completely different day. A hurricane was approaching Charleston, and Grace had been urging Charles to sign a roof repair authorization before the contractor removed the reserved materials. Another recording captured Charles speaking clearly and calmly. "I am not giving the house to Grace because she cared for me. I am giving her responsibility for it because she is the only person who does not want to sell it." Grace listened to Charles' voice in the dark room. For the first time since the day she had been thrown out of the gate, she felt that someone in the Whitmore family had truly seen her. Then came another recording. Victoria was asking her father to abandon the community care plan so the family could sell the estate. Charles refused. He reminded her that a family name meant nothing if all it knew how to protect was the name itself. Daniel filed the complete recordings, the metadata, and an emergency request for a hearing. On the night before the auction, his phone rang. The court had agreed to hear the matter at 8 o'clock the following morning. Grace looked at the clock. Then she looked at the bank notice. The auction of Whitmore House was scheduled to begin at 9. They had exactly 1 hour to make sure the full truth was heard before the fall of a gavel turned the house into a stranger's hotel. At exactly 8 o'clock, the emergency hearing began in Charleston County Court. Grace sat beside Daniel. In front of them were the wooden box and the complete, unedited recordings. Victoria and Rebecca sat on the opposite side of the courtroom. Eleanor was seated in the row behind them. Samuel, Michael, representatives from the bank, and members of the press were all present. Only a few blocks away, preparations were underway for the auction scheduled to begin at 9. Victoria's attorney stood first. Charles Whitmore was an elderly man weakened by a stroke and dependent on the nurse caring for him. The trust gave authority to that very same person. We contend that he lacked the necessary mental capacity and was subjected to undue influence. Daniel did not mention the garbage bags left in the rain. Instead, he presented the mental capacity evaluations, medical records, notarization documents, and recorded deed. Charles's physician confirmed that although Charles had physical limitations after his stroke, he fully understood his property, recognized his family members, and understood the legal consequences of his decisions. The notarization video showed Charles correctly stating the address of Whitmore House, describing its history, and naming every member of his immediate family. He explained that Grace was not allowed to sell the house for her personal benefit. Eleanor would retain the right to live there as long as she complied with the trust, and part of the estate was required to serve elderly members of the community. "I am not creating this trust to make Grace wealthy," Charles said in the video. "I am giving her the responsibility of protecting this house from the people who see nothing but its sale price." Daniel then presented financial records proving that Grace had used nearly all of her personal inheritance to pay property taxes, repair the roof, replace the electrical system, and prevent the house from being lost because of debt. Not one of those payments had ever been reimbursed to her. Samuel testified that Grace had cared for Charles after his stroke, managed his medication, and repeatedly insisted that every future plan protect Eleanor's right to remain in the home. "Miss Grace never asked what the house was worth," Samuel said. "She only asked what had to be done to keep it from being lost." Victoria requested that the recording previously released to the press be played. Grace's voice filled the courtroom. "You have to sign before they take the house away." Victoria's attorney called it evidence of coercion. Michael immediately presented the metadata and the cuts visible in the audio waveform. The sound of rain, air conditioning, and wind came from different dates. The phrases had not been spoken during the same conversation. Daniel played the complete recordings. Everyone in the courtroom heard Grace telling Charles that he should wait until his doctor evaluated him and an independent attorney confirmed his legal capacity before signing anything. The sentence that had been edited to look like pressure had actually come from a completely different conversation about emergency roof repairs before a hurricane. Then Charles's voice came through clearly and calmly. "I am not giving the house to Grace because she cared for me. I am giving her responsibility for it because she is the only person who does not want to sell it." In the next recording, Victoria could be heard asking her father to abandon the community care plan so the family could sell the estate. Charles refused. He told her that a family estate could not continue to stand as a symbol of legacy if the people inside it only knew how to take from it. Eleanor closed her eyes when she heard her husband's voice. When she was called to testify, she walked to the witness stand more slowly than usual. Daniel asked, "Did you know Grace used her own money to save Whitmore House?" "Yes." "Did you correct anyone when relatives called her a gold digger?" Eleanor looked at Grace. "No. I knew she paid the taxes and repaired the house, but I treated it as her duty as a daughter-in-law. I allowed people to humiliate her because I did not want to admit that the Whitmore family needed an outsider to save us." Eleanor also confirmed that Victoria had taken Andrew's records and pressured her to sign documents authorizing a sale immediately after the funeral. It was the first time Eleanor had chosen the truth, even though she knew it might place her daughter under investigation. Daniel moved on to the mortgage. The agreement did not include Andrew's middle name, which he always used in his legal signature. The signature itself showed signs of imitation. Phone records, airline tickets, and hotel documents proved that on the date the mortgage was supposedly signed, Andrew was in Atlanta. Then the email he had sent Daniel that same day appeared on the screen. "I never gave Victoria permission to borrow money against Whitmore House." Michael presented the financial trail showing where the $750,000 had gone. The money went into Victoria's company, a failed project, personal expenses, and Rebecca's fee. An updated title report had originally been requested, but it was replaced with an older version that did not list the trust. Rebecca tried to keep her voice steady. "I only followed my client's instructions." Daniel displayed an internal email sent from Rebecca's own account. "It has to be completed before the trustee appears." The clock reached 8:47. The buyers had already received their bidding numbers. The bank confirmed that unless a new court order arrived before 9 o'clock, the auction would begin. Daniel stood. The property belonged to the trust before this loan existed. The trust never approved the mortgage. Andrew Whitmore's signature was forged, and the updated title report was deliberately concealed. We asked the court to confirm the trust, suspend enforcement of the loan, and cancel the auction. The judge recessed to review the evidence. Grace listened to every tick of the clock. She thought about the rooms Charles had wanted to dedicate to elderly people. She thought about the gate that had once closed in Lily's face. At 8:56, The judge returned. The court ruled that the Whitmore Preservation Trust had been validly created while Charles had full legal capacity. Grace was confirmed as the successor trustee, the primary beneficiary, and a lawful resident of the estate. Because the trust had never authorized the mortgage, the loan could not be enforced against Whitmore House. The order canceling the auction was signed and transmitted electronically from the courtroom. At the auction site, the auctioneer had just raised the gavel when the bank representative received the order. Whitmore House was immediately withdrawn from the sale. The gavel came down before a single bid was accepted. In front of the same people who had accused Grace, the court barred Victoria from accessing trust records or managing trust property. The account that had received the loan money was frozen. Evidence involving forgery, concealment of records, and misuse of funds was referred to prosecutors. Rebecca became the subject of professional and financial investigations. The bank withdrew its request to auction the estate. Grace did not look at Eleanor with triumph. "I will follow every condition Charles left behind," she said. "Mrs. Eleanor will not be forced out of the home where she has lived her entire life." Eleanor was allowed to remain in the East Wing, but she had to sign residency rules, stay out of trust management, and treat Grace and Lily with respect. Victoria was required to move out and was prohibited from accessing trust property. After the investigation, Victoria was held responsible for forgery, fraud, and misuse of funds. Luxury assets and part of her ownership interest in the company were sold to provide restitution. Rebecca lost her position, had her professional license suspended, and was held responsible for the fraudulent fee she had received. Andrew's death was also reviewed in connection with the vehicle maintenance issue. Investigators found no evidence that Victoria had intentionally caused the accident. However, her concealment of the brake warning became part of the civil case and related investigation. An independent review board concluded that Grace had not manipulated Charles. The care facility reinstated her, apologized, and paid the wages she had lost during the suspension. The personal money Grace had used to save Whitmore House was reimbursed from legally recovered assets, not from the portion of the trust reserved for community use. Grace created an education fund for Lily and invested the remainder back into the estate. One wing of Whitmore House became a daytime care center for elderly people. Another became a counseling and temporary housing center for women who had been forced from their homes after divorce, widowhood, or personal crisis. Samuel kept his job and his right to live on the property. He became the official steward of the estate's history. He placed the brass key inside a glass display case beside Charles's written words about how the house would remember the entire story. Eleanor issued a public correction. She admitted that Grace had never manipulated her husband and that her own favoritism had allowed Victoria to go too far. Grace accepted the apology, but she did not call it complete forgiveness. "Trust does not return because of one sentence," she said. "It only returns through actions repeated long enough to prove they are real." Grace stopped, idealizing Andrew. She placed the photograph Lily had wanted to recover beside his unsent message. One reminded her of love. The other reminded her that love without courage could still cause harm. A few months later, Whitmore House welcomed elderly visitors and women in need of temporary shelter. The cold entrance hall that had once guarded the Whitmore name was now filled with conversation, hot tea, and Lily's drawings. Daniel continued visiting as the attorney for the trust. After one final meeting ended, he asked Grace if she would like to have coffee. "Is this trust business?" she asked. "No, just an opportunity for two adults to talk without a legal file sitting between them." Grace smiled. "Then one cup of coffee." That afternoon, she took Lily to the gate that had once been locked in front of them. Grace placed the key in her daughter's hand. A home does not belong to the people whose name it carries. It belongs to the people who know how to protect those living inside it. Lily opened the gate. Behind them was no longer a cold mansion built to defend the Whitmore name. It was a home filled with light and purpose. The gate that had once shut Grace out now opened for people searching for safety, dignity, and a chance to begin again.